Hello and welcome again to the next video in the series for C483 Principles of Management. This one will deal with a very important topic and one that many students unfortunately overlook, I think because it comes at the end of the study plan. It's the seventh competency listed in the course, but it's very important nonetheless. And the first slide we're going to talk about is organizational structure and the good old org chart, or organizational chart. And so the org chart, as you can see an example here, figure 8.1, obviously there's many that you can look at in your own organization or others that you're familiar with, and you'll probably find a lot more detailed information, but this will suffice for our purposes of the review video. So org chart is a reporting structure and division of labor in an organization. That's what that represents. So each box represents or is some work to be performed. It's a position usually in an organization. Sometimes there's a name attached, or very often there's a name attached. Otherwise, it could just be a position, for example, position title. And so that represents work to be performed in the organization, right? Everybody has their role in an organization, and this kind of highlights that. So if you look, there's two really key concepts in this competency, and they are vertical structure and horizontal structure. And there's a lot to read about in Chapter 8, a very important chapter for this competency. Sometimes folks get confused, and maybe even the way the wording is in the text, that there's either or, but there is no either or. Every organization has both a vertical and horizontal structure, unless literally you have one person in the organization. But as soon as you have more than a few people, you have some kind of a structure, whether it's just, let's say, a boss or an owner and some workers. Obviously, as that gets more elaborate, there's much more details to work out in organizational structure. So vertical structure, you see that up and down, the vertical arrow, the red one there. That represents issues with authority, and I shouldn't say issues, but deals with issues of authority. Obviously, that brings up a lot of issues, but basically that represents, is probably a better word, it represents authority structure, right? From the president, the CEO up top, maybe it's a board of directors, all the way down to let's say, the lowest levels of the organization and all the reporting hierarchies or levels in between, and highlights the relationship responsibility people have to each other within that structure. There's also the horizontal structure, which is represented by the blue arrow going left and right, horizontally, of course, and that deals with the actual structure of organization and departmentalization. It's work, again, that work that's divided up into the different, let's say, functional areas. In this example, there's kind of a functional divisional mix here. You have finance, R&D, marketing, personnel. Those are different functions of the organization and a part of the horizontal structure, right? So your human resources, your personnel department is not going to necessarily do research and development. They're probably not going to do much finance. And vice versa. Finance is not going to get involved in personnel. Finance is not going to get involved in dealing with the customer as marketing and sales would. They have their own role to perform. And of course, obviously they work together very closely. And they do similar things sometimes, but they have a function, they have a specialization, and that's represented by that horizontal structure. So make sure you take a look at it. It's a very important slide and very, I think, useful for understanding what that horizontal and vertical means. Fundamental concepts of organization or organizing. We're going to move forward with the next slide, talk about differentiation and integration. Differentiation is the idea that an organization is composed of various units, different units that work on varying tasks using different skills and methods, right? Kind of a textbook definition, which pretty much it is. And it's also the concept of dividing work into smaller tasks and assigning to different groups, and the division of labor, a very key concept, division of labor, right? You have things to do. Not everybody's going to do everything, obviously. So that's why you have different functions. You have different areas of specializations. You're dividing up the work among different groups and units, and that's why you have those functional areas, like I just said. HR, you have finance, you have sales, you have operations, maybe logistics, you have manufacturing, things like that. That's how the work is divided. And you also have the concept of integration, and that's the extent that these areas will work together. So first, you obviously have to split them up. They're doing their own thing, but you also have to integrate them. So you have to basically coordinate and have them work together so that they can achieve the mission and goals of the organization, right, as stated right there. So linking together to achieve the mission and goals of the organization. So another important slide. So feel free to go forward and always refer back to the text. That's really where everything is taken from unless otherwise noted. So it's just going to help you that much more in reinforcing or remembering the material and reinforcing what it means, especially when the assessment comes up. More important concepts, I don't want to say more important, but some more important concepts you should know. Delegation, authority, hierarchy, centralized, decentralized. Delegation, you're assigning new and additional responsibilities to a subordinate, somebody that reports to you. Okay, very common in management, right? You delegate responsibilities to your underlings, to people who are responsible or reporting to you. Otherwise, really work couldn't get done. Of course, there is a way of saying, well, you're going to do it exactly this way, but most people in today's organization wouldn't stand for that. Although it is actually sometimes still common. So there's authority, and that's a legitimate right to make decisions and tell other people what to do. And there's different types of authority. We're not going to get into all those. Referent authority, things like that, power in the organization. But we'll leave that aside for other courses in the future. But again, the right to make the decision, tell people what to do, and that's where you go back to that hierarchy, that level in the vertical structure in the organization. Again, hierarchy, different authority levels in an organization. We just talked about that. The vertical, the up and down arrow on an org chart, or an organizational structure. And then the key concepts of centralized and decentralized. So if something is centralized, the decisions are made at higher levels and passed down to the organization. This is how it's going to be done. Let's carry it out, right? Centralized, very much, usually top down. So it's centralized in one, there's one area making decisions. That's usually upper management. Decentralized, they're made at lower levels, okay? Or decisions are made at lower levels of the organization. So decentralized structure allows people to kind of, again, more of that delegation, more of that decision making on lower levels. So you can kind of play a more active role in doing your work and getting work accomplished. We move forward to key organizational structures. This is going to be important as well, and we already talked about it, and it's the functional organization and the divisional. So take a look at those two figures there directly from Chapter 8. So in a functional organization, all right, we basically, most organizations are divided up like this. Departmentalization around specialized activities such as, and we just talked about this several times, production, marketing, human resources, IT, finance, on and on, right? And you can see the example right there. And they all report to the CEO. Maybe there's a vice president of those different functional areas or departments, whatever you want to call them. But that's just a very common way of organizing a company. Divisional, very similar but slightly different. It's a structure based on division, and it's really based on the product, the customer, maybe geography, your North American division or East Coast division or European, let's say, division, and that's all within a larger organization. So a little bit of subdivided there, subdivision, I should say, and just with the functional, it's basically the same thing, but you're dividing them up. So Division A, as you can see, have their own functional areas, operations, marketing, finance, for the example that they use here. Division B has their own operations, marketing, so that gets divided up. So it's almost like self-contained entities, and that's, instead of different companies, they're just divisions of a larger company. Okay, so take a look at that. Try to apply that to your own examples from your own life, your own work experience, and it'll make more sense. You'll probably say, oh yeah, that's right, I'm familiar with that. So Luckily, there's something in it, in it for everybody in this course, and also in this, especially this competency, because every business, every organization has a structure, some kind of structure, whether it's apparent or not. It does have one. So, matrix, another one, a little difficult to explain here. This is directly from 8.5, again, chapter 8. It's a little more complicated. You really have two bosses. And that's the key thing to know. There are a lot of disadvantages and a lot of advantages to this structure, and certain industry groups have been using it successfully for a long time. But the key feature is, again, certain managers report to two bosses in one functional area, and another maybe in divisional, in a divisional, in order to get the benefits of both. Okay, so it's like a mix. So you have a production group, and they report to a production manager, but also a project or a product manager. You see that there? And then production group will report to another production group will report to project manager B, but also production manager or divisional head, let's say. So this is, again, kind of tricky. If you look at it, it's like, what is that? And I think it's the best way to try or attempt at categorizing this. All companies who use this do it slightly different way. There's dotted line reporting, direct line, but the idea, it goes against the main function of management, the main kind of laws of management, where one person reports to one boss, right? It's just easier that way. As a two, it's like you have these sometimes competing responsibilities, right? Conflicting loyalties, or however you want to call it, but that actually is one of the major drawbacks to this structure. But suffice it to say, you just have to know kind of the beginning or the basics of what this means, and that should highlight that enough to be successful on the assessment. So network organization, another one very important. Chapter 8 again. Hub and spoke, you can explain this many different ways. It's also called modular, virtual, many different names to it. It's a network. It's a dynamic structure, provides a lot of flexibility, and it centers around a network, usually independent entities that collaborate on a contracted, kind of outsourced, contracted, project basis, product basis, rather than a traditional organization. What does that mean? Well, instead of having all these different areas that we just talked about, functional areas, divisions, everybody's working for the organization, you have a key group of people, and they outsource everything. Everything is based on, project-based. So we're making a new product, and I'm going to outsource the design, production, the distribution, sales. My suppliers will come from somewhere else, and you just kind of coordinate everything, okay? And this is much more prevalent now because we have the internet, we have the technology to make it happen, and it's becoming more, I don't want to say more popular, but more commonplace than other, that's how you start out pretty much. If you have an idea, you keep that basic management structure, that idea, and everything else is outsourced. So you don't have to have such a large organization, and the key thing is you can usually save costs, right? So if you have a fixed organizational structure, you have to pay these people whether the job is there or not, whether the work is there or not. So, and obviously hiring and firing presents its own set of challenges. So this is a much more flexible way of approaching it. Of course, after certain time frames, certain scale, you have no choice but to hire more people and just grow in a traditional way. But anyway, the virtual network organization is quite commonplace today. More concepts that we're going to talk about in the next slide are strategic alliance, learning organization, and high involvement organization. Strategic alliance, formal relationship created among independent organizations with the purpose of joint pursuits of mutual goals. So as opposed to a joint venture where people organizations formalize an agreement, and kind of create one company out of it, or even merger where you kind of two companies come together. An alliance is it's formal, but it's not that formal as far as coming together as one structure. You're aligning with other companies, and it's very, very commonplace. One company has advantage in another area, you have an advantage in one area, and combined you're able to better overcome the competition, do better things, and better reach your target audience, your target customer base, and keep them perhaps. Learning organization, skilled at creating, acquiring, and transferring knowledge, and modifying behavior to reflect new knowledge and insight. So concept that came out a few decades ago already, knowledge management, learning organization, but really important, right? Knowledge is power. We've heard that many times. Knowledge and people and working for an organization, they're constantly developing new ideas, and just look at all the stuff we have today with technology, competition growing so rapidly, really globalized, coming from everywhere. And so you have to have a way, or an organization has to have a way of transferring that and making new knowledge and gathering it and figuring out, okay, well, this can't be used in this area, but you know what? There is another area we're looking at down in that department for that product, and so maybe we can use it there. Okay, so but if you don't know it exists in the organization, if people just keep it to themselves and there's no way of sharing that, right, then it's of no use to them. It won't help anybody, right, except maybe the person that keeps it to themselves. So knowledge management, knowledge organization, learning organization, very similar, very well known. Technology allows us to do that much more than just a few decades before, right? We have social media, we have internet, we can do pretty much anything on our phones these days, our pocket computers, and so it just makes that much more. It makes it also a little bit daunting. There's just information overload. That's another thing. But definitely makes it possible to collaborate more. High involvement organization, the last one we want to talk about here. It's a type of organization which top management ensures there's consensus about the direction in which business is heading. So a little bit more democratic than your typical top-down, the boss tells you what to do type of organization. So high involvement, a lot of involvement with employees. And yeah, it's kind of the norm, especially in, let's say, a high-tech Silicon Valley, rapidly changing type of marketplace. So much more common these days than not. Organizational concepts or control concepts, talking about control, organizational, very important part of management, and keeping that structure together. Standardization, probably heard this from many different examples. Establishing common routines and procedures that apply uniformly to everyone. Formalization, presence of rules and regulations governing how people in the organization interact. So the word, standard, formal, bureaucratic is kind of like, that's sometimes negative because it constricts your freedom. But without these things, you couldn't have a large organization these days. Just not possible. People have to know where the boundaries are, know how to respond in certain areas, and know what let's say the consequences are for not following that procedure or standard and so forth. Because the idea is everybody has to be aligned to the common goals of the organization, right? The strategic plan of the organization, the mission and vision that we talked about way back in strategic planning. Mechanistic organization, a form of organization that seeks to maximize internal efficiency. Another important concept. Mechanized, mechanical, machine, right? That's where that comes from. So it's a little bit easier to perhaps understand and remember. Internal efficiency, not really deviating that much, very mechanistic. Organic structure emphasizes flexibility. So again, your example I use very often, internal efficiency, it works for some areas, you just have to do it in some areas, and in others you have to be more organic, more flexible. So if you're in a high-tech, again, Silicon Valley environment, things change daily. you need to be organic. You can't be very rigid. You can't be very mechanistic. Once you reach a certain economy of scale, or you can obviously do that, and you need to do that. But again, it doesn't fit every structure. So every organization is a blending of the two. Okay, every organization is a blending of the two. Obviously, some would argue, but if you have again, nuclear power plant or a power plant in general, has to be on 24/7, cannot have any many mistakes, can't deviate from the norm. You're gonna you treat that differently than your new Facebook organization or a new venture that you have in technology field. It's going to be different. So those are things to keep in mind. And then another concept, and I forget now if it comes up actually in this competency directly, but it's important nonetheless. It's a boundaryless organization. It has to do with communication in the organization. Again, talking about sharing information. We talked about the knowledge management, learning organization, boundaryless organization, no barriers to information flow. Okay, sounds very good. Of course, there are always barriers to flow, but the idea of a boundaryless is that we freely exchange information, and there's no keeping that information to yourself. It's give and take, that sharing of information, and the idea that it helps organizations become better at what they do. Okay. Characteristics of control. Again, a lot of stuff with this competency, and we're going to try to move forward quickly here. Characteristics of control. Process that directs activities of individuals towards achievement of organizational goals. That's what control is. Take a look at those three areas from chapter 16, table 16-2. So just briefly, bureaucratic control, formal rules, standards, hierarchy, legitimate authority, works best where tasks are certain, workers are independent. Okay? They know how to act in a certain way. Bureaucratic control. It sounds bureaucracy doesn't sound good here in the United States, but it's very important because otherwise we couldn't have organizations working together or people working together in organizations. And there's also market control. Okay, and there's a way of the market. Again, free market uses prices, competition, profit centers, exchange relationships, works best where tangible output can be identified and market can be established between parties. So you're using that market to decide how things interact, the control, the pricing and so forth. And there's clan control, and it involves culture, shared value, beliefs, expectations, and trust. Works best where there's no one best way to do a job, and employees are empowered to make decisions. Okay, so more culture focused, culture, shared values, the idea of a clan, a tribe, people should be sharing a common culture. There's a mix of all these, of course, but this is kind of, if you looked at them independently, that's what kind of they would represent. So bureaucratic, market, and clan control. How the basic overarching way of controlling, managing an organization, really. So remember those. And then managerial control process, again, chapter 16, I think very important here. That figure, you want to take a look at that, helps explain how that works. You want to first, to be able to control something, you have to measure it, right? So you first, and you have to know what you're measuring, and you have to set some kind of standard, set a performance standard, quantity, quality, time, cost. How are we measuring that? What are we doing? And then measuring performance, oral, written, personal observation, quantitative, qualitative. So what's the standard? What do we need to accomplish? How are we going to measure that? And then once we do, we compare it to the standard. We compare performance against some predetermined standards and determining deviations, which, again, talking about kind of total quality management, how many deviations, Six Sigma type stuff. Principle of exception. How are we doing in relation to those established standards? And then we take action. We determine the deviation. How much are we off, or not. And then, does it meet? Yes or no? Yes, then reinforce. We continue to work. We continue to go forward and maybe, raise the bar, maybe change things going forward. But if we're not meeting those standards, we take corrective action. That's listed right there in that figure. We have to do something to kind of get us back on track. And so we go back and look at the performance standards. Do we need to modify those? How are we going to address that? So that's kind of the control process in an organization, managerial or bureaucratic control cycle to be specific. So take a look at that and write that down. A lot of these charts and figures and graphs are important. So you want to maybe even copy them as best you can in your own notebook and notes so that you remember them better. Some other approaches to bureaucratic control, slightly different here, but feed forward. So before operations begin, policies, procedures, rules designed to ensure that planned activities are carried out properly. So feed forward. You're looking to the future, right? You're establishing some processes beforehand. And then concurrent is currently, control process used while things are happening. Plans are being carried out, directing, monitoring, fine-tuning activities as they are performed. Concurrent. Feedback, going back afterwards. Control that focuses on the use of information on previous results to correct deviations from the acceptable standards. Okay, so it's different approaches to bureaucratic control. Again, before, during, and after. Okay, take a look at those. And then I believe we're coming towards the end here, the final slide, or one of the final slides. We look at designing effective control systems, and the first of 5 is establishing the performance standards, right? Provide adequate information to employees. So must be accurate, objective standards, quantitative, right? What's our standard? Give that information to the employees, and the feedback, give them a chance to give some information back or some comments, let's say. Has to be communicated. Self-correction is important, so basically be able to do that on their own, to self-correct as they go forward. Ensure that's acceptable, that it's possible and not impossible to achieve. Maintain open communication. Feel that they can report this bad news or potential bad news without fear of, let's shoot the messenger type of behavior. And then use multiple approaches in the control. So balanced scorecard is an example. Look at many different areas, not just the money thing. So look at balanced scorecard. You're looking at finance. You're looking at the customer, effect on the customer, the process taking place, how this thing is carried out, how these things are carried out, and learning growth measures of the employees of the organization. How are we learning? How are we growing as an organization? Like we talked a few slides ago about the learning organization, so forth. So there you have it, those 5, and I guess we finished it up. So we wrapped it up. I know we're coming on a half hour here for the video, but hope you enjoyed the organizational structure video. Feel free to go back and review it again and use that information as a basis for further study in the textbook, in the courseware, and as you go forward to your objective assessment. So with that, good luck, and see you again.